I'm Device from Australis, and welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's a joke-free zone.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is going to be Ye, currently of technically no team, but we'll obviously get into that in the interview a little smidgen. So obviously, to start out with, the reason why the overlay says CSGO and not Valorant is one, I haven't got a Valorant one because, spoiler, almost no one who's played Valorant actually deserves to have a massive interview about their career. It's a new game, in it. And then two, you were obviously originally a CSGO player, including professional at CSGO. So let's start there, yeah. Like, first things first is when I looked up, I wondered, because I remember you coming, like, obviously the tier one exposure began at Complexity, but I vaguely remember you on that E-United lineup way before that, where it was sort of like invite level in NA, but it wasn't like a big team, etc. But when I actually looked up, you weren't even that actually young around then. Weren't you like 18 or something already by then? You were like, were you a late bloomer in CS? Did you get going late? I know you were in a lot of teams that were in NA, but were you just around the scene for a long time?
Yeah, kind of. So originally, even before CSGO, I started off with Call of Duty on the PC. That
were you
was
any
like
good?
my original. Oh yeah. When I was on the PC scene, at least, there wasn't like any LAN tournaments, unfortunately, for that game.
Okay, because it's all console and shit, right?
Yeah. It's basically it's all
Right.
console. That's where the major like competitive scene and stuff like that.
Right.
So there was much less of a at least like a PC scene. So the tournaments that I did have were like some SIVA ones and like stuff like that. And when I used to participate in that ones, like, because they have like an anti-cheat, I get like accused like all the time, and eventually they even kind of like just booted me out of the scene entirely. I remember at like one point, I was playing with my team, and all of a sudden like this match ended, and they just banned me out of the TeamSpeak, and they're like, "You're cheating, man," and it's just like it's obvious. I'm like, well, all right, I guess, and honestly, it just got to the point in which I wanted to kind of like go further. You know, I wanted to go to LANs. I was looking at all these like major like CS:GO LANs going on and stuff like that, and you know that seemed like an amazing thing for me. So I switched over when I was like right around like 14 or 15 is when I hopped over to CS:GO.
And then obviously the Complexity lineup, like I say, was the one you got known in. But if people don't know, this is where people get lost in the mix of it all. Because the problem with that lineup is it did like every now and then it would just change like one or two players. So I think people only remember the last one. They remember the one with like Stanislaw, etc. They don't remember that ages before that it had like Def from the UK and like fucking a bunch of people who'd already sort of been and gone. Like had, what's his name, Desi from the old school. Android obviously was around this level his whole career. Slemmy, who briefly in Cloud9, if people know. Like this is like an interesting bunch of people. It's also like these are people who've also been around Invite, right? They've tried some teams, been in and out. What was this first Complexity era like? Like, for example, did it feel like you were actually pro in CSGO at this time?
Yeah, that was like basically my first pro team ever. The early days of Complexity were it was kind of odd. I'm not gonna lie, because like I went from playing like online all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden you transition over into like you get thrown into like a team house, and I think at the time it was Colorado. They had like some big old team.
Okay.
They had some big old team house over there, so like everyone was like kind of like shipped over there. You start playing as well with a lot more structured, because like before that, I mean the entire NA scene even at that time was just extremely puggy. So to have like any strats at all, I sort of had to memorize like 5 or 6, 7, 8 different strats, which is something that
All right, so you just play off field before, just play your spots, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like before that, it was just kind of like a lot of it was just like individual skill, where it was just like go do whatever. And now I kind of had to like work into like a system. So the early days were honestly, it was pretty interesting, and not to mention just like learning how to like work with people in like real life, because like even prior to that, I didn't have like a job or anything like that. So I was working on even just having good relations like outside the game.
What sort of role do you think they put you in this time period? Like, what sort of spots would you play, or what's like essentially what type of a player were you in CS:GO at this time?
So at that time, I was actually signed on as the primary op.
Okay,
but that was the
kind of funny how it ended up in Valorant then, if people don't know. But we'll obviously get to that later, because obviously later in Complexity you were a rifler, right?
So that was something that at least for me personally, I've always been really, really good with is like just opping in general. And initially when I came on, they had me as an op, and I remember even like the first LAN we went to, like it was, I think it was like a Fragadelphia, like it was like one of the smaller time LANs, but we were just trying to get some practice. I think that was like the whole like mindset. So when we went to this LAN, it was I remember at least with my op, like I always did like really, really well, but I also could rifle as well. Even before I joined Complexity, I also was able to rifle if like need be. Like I was essentially just a hybrid player, but I did really well, and then we ended up needing to make some roster changes, and I think eventually brought on PTR,
Yes.
and that's when I kind of went from an op kind of to a hybrid, and then kind of slowly over time, unfortunately, I think I was kind of like forced off that role, and the hybrid went to like def and just put me as like a pure entry.
Right. Obviously, I don't know your relationships. You're welcome to rebuke me, say what you like.
Yeah, sure.
As far as I know, PTR was a bit overrated as an AWPer, and it was mainly he's just like a veteran, is why he was always in the scene. And I know, for example, Warden was your coach. He always wants to have some veterans. It's sort of like our NBA approach. You want to have like a couple of vets, a couple of young guys.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were a better AWPer than PTR, right?
I mean, I would. Well, I at least I like to think so, but I hadn't had much experience, I guess, like opping against like the pro level. It was kind of my idea to bring on PTR because like honestly, I didn't have like a good idea who else to get in the scene, and we were kind of like a little low on I guess like a budget at the time, because this was like Complexity even before they had like the Dallas Cowboys budget, like, you know, massive, be able to throw money around like however much they want. So the big thing was like we kind of like just brought them on mainly because like we didn't have like much other options at the time. In terms of like PTR, like as a player and a teammate, I didn't mind so much my time with him because like he did bring a lot in terms of just like raw experience. He's been around the scene like long enough, like he knew kind of like what was right, and he had like experience a lot with like God B and like his kind of system that he ran over. So like he brought over a lot of that in terms of like, you know, this is how like a good system should work, like here's how like communication should work and stuff like that. So he brought like a lot of experience in terms of playing. He had decent skills, but I think what really held him back as like a player was kind of like his mental, because like I remember like a few different instances where he would get really, really like upset, like even in the middle of games where sometimes he would like slam a desk or, you know, something of that nature, like right in the middle of like, you know, important like matches, or like he'll say, I remember like one time we were like in the room and we were doing like a match or something like that, and someone makes a mistake, and like he would say something that was loud enough to hear it, but he like mute his mic, but you still could like you know, hear it in like the room. So I'm just like, well, you know, yeah, I'm like, Pete, kind of got to chill with some of that, but I think he was like going through some stuff like at that time, so I don't really blame him too much for that. But I mean, overall, I'd say like, you know, I think I learned, you know, some stuff from him. I think my teammates learned some stuff from him, but I think he was just going through some stuff for, you know, at that time.
As I referenced, obviously your coach, Warden, is a very experienced player, was himself a top pro when he was in 1.6, right? I actually know Warden fairly well. I know he's a guy who, like, he actually tries to bring both sides to the game as a coach. He tries to do some of the tactical stuff and work with you, but also he's very much, like, big on stuff like team spirit and people, like, doing stuff together and hanging out and all that. Who would you say Warden is? What was the experience like working with him?
So, Warden has had, like, a big, like, influence for me, at least my, like, whole career. He didn't bring maybe like so much a lot tactically, but what he was kind of like more of like a leader of men in terms of like, you know, making sure like morale's up, making sure, you know, in team relationships are good. And also like he dealt with like most of like any of the org stuff. So if there was stuff that needed to be done, or if like the players really needed something, like he would always like kind of like fight for the players, because like he has like a ton of experience as a player. And he also, something I think is a little underrated is like when you have someone who wins like a whole bunch, he kind of knows what like a winning team environment looks like. He knows, you know, like how you should approach like going into like some of these like big matches, like how mentally you should be. So he brought like a lot of that over, and he also knew, you know, if someone was like fucking around, he'd obviously, you know, get onto that. So I think that's something I really respect about him, because obviously, you know, even like 1.6, he had a very successful, you know, career being with these group of complexity guys where they ended up doing pretty well. So,
right, obviously, at this time period, as you say, like complexity isn't the biggest org at this point in time. It's like one of a bunch of teams that are behind the Cloud9s and Team Liquid to the World, CLG, etc. And at this point, I always describe it to people as like, unless you actually literally like Simple or ZywOo or some alien like that, there's like a ladder. You have to go step by step by step. And, you know, like you get on the team, then you go to the lands. Usually at the lands, you're going to be last place, then you're second to last, and then you gradually work your way up, right? Obviously, along this time period, you got to go to a minor and you tried to qualify for the major. It didn't happen, but spoiler, this is when I think it was like 2 spots from the minors. So like there's Team Liquid, there's NRG, there's a whole bunch of teams, complex CLG. There's a bunch of squads out there that were good at this time. Do you remember going to your first minor? Do you really think you were going to make it?
I thought we had a decent shot of maybe making it, but I knew the road there was going to be kind of tough. I remember that being kind of like my first big like experience into like the pro scene, just because like I started to realize how much differences there were, like tactically speaking, like from us and like some of like the other top teams, especially like, you know, even like CLG, where I'd see like how they played together and worked together and how methodical they were in like some instances, and I realized right away that like we were kind of pretty far apart, and even myself like individually, that I really needed to put like a lot more work into refining, like, you know, just like essentially just adapting my game to see like if they're doing like, you know, these certain pieces like a util, you know, how do I best like come up with a game plan like around that, and just being able to, you know, adapt mid game rather than just kind of like just going off the like flow essentially. So even for myself and individually, I knew I had like a lot to work on, because it's really hard to describe, I guess, for like anyone when you play in a scene for like so long and you get tossed into like a scene with like very, very experienced players with also, you know, equally, I guess, like as insane skill. It's hard to describe. Like you have to like shift like your whole like mentality. Like it becomes like a lot more competitive, and like even like the smallest like differences matter more and more. So I think for me it was just, I had to shift my perspective, and especially after that minor, because I think we just got blown out, to be honest with you. So that was a big turning point for me, at least.
Right, one detail a lot of people won't know about your career, because obviously this is going to have like an interesting echo later in the interview, is I always thought actually a near miss that you guys had was FNS left CLG, came to Complexity, and it's like, if people don't know, he was always like a slightly underrated leader. Like he was definitely like third or fourth best NA leader, always ran a good team. But the problem you had was, cause Stewie 2K went to like SK Gaming or whatever, then he just got bought by Cloud9 like whatever, like 3 months later or something ridiculous. So like, even though obviously later in Valorant you got to play with him, like this could have been like a big move, right, when he came in at that time.
Oh, dude, it was, oh man, this was such a sad moment, because at that point, I think especially after a minor, I think Slimmy came to us and he kind of just wanted to like retire. He didn't want to like play anymore. He was just kind of like done with like the whole scene. So we were trying to look for like a new in-game leader, and I hit up John, or FNS, I guess in this case. And I hit him up. I'm like, hey, you want to come play? You know, and because like I think he recently just got released from like FNS, or not FNS, but he got released from like CLG, and I think because like Kusta wanted to call or something at that point, which was like kind of weird. So I saw that as an opportunity, because I saw how CLG played, especially at that minor. So I hit him up and I'm like, hey, you want to come play? He's like, yeah, no, 100% down. And eventually he ended up signing on over. And actually, our initial results are really good, and something I think he really helped me with personally was he was actually someone who is not only a good leader, but he's able to give good insight. Like he's a very good like outside perspective. He's like, here's what I think you're like doing wrong. Work on this, improve this, you'll be good. You know, because sometimes I think I used to, even like for me personally, I used to over prepare for matches. Like sometimes I'd like death match like 3 hours like in advance, like before like a big match. So that was like a big thing for me. Is like, hey, like chill back on that like a little bit, just do basic warm up because like I know your aim is better than that. So he was like a good outside perspective for me, and also just knew how to build like a good system like in game for our team. And eventually, what ended up happening was I remember just one day, like I walked in, or he actually hit me up like the night before, and he's like, "Hey, listen, Jake, I've been bought out by Cloud9." He's like, "No hard feelings, but like it's like he basically phrased it as like it's something I have to do, you know."
Sure.
And honestly, like I was really.
By the way, for anyone who's not aware,
like,
this is obviously the time period when they're like the reigning major champions of that team. So he's thinking probably it's like a shot at the top, right?
No, exactly. Because like I think this was like post. Was this post Cloud9, like where it was like after they won the major?
Yeah, they won the major like 2 months earlier or something, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It was like right after. I think they bombed out of that like tournament right after the major. But they bombed out of that tournament, and yeah, they just won like a big one. So he saw that as like an opportunity, and I mean like. You kind of have to respect that, like that point. You know, they have like not only is it arguably like a better org, but they have like a ton more like talent and just like history. So like I think anyone would do it, but it kind of sucked because we started to see some really good results, and that kind of like threw us for like a loop. So I think we ended up having to bring back Slummy, I think, for forget what next tournament it was, but we had to bring him back for like a little bit.
Right, obviously a key moment though that did end up happening. This is where, like, it's like that saying, like if the door's closed, you go in through the window or whatever. What then happened later was you got Stanislaw and Shahzam actually. So this is actually, if you look at the time period, these are pretty good pickups. Like Stanislaw obviously is someone who always had like the talent. I mean, just being in Team Liquid, if people don't know, it's just that it hadn't worked in Team Liquid. So it's more like, right, if people don't know, it reminds me of like in the NFL, like sometimes people throw a quarterback away, but like maybe it just doesn't fit your system or your coach or whatever. Then you go to a different team, maybe it's good there. Maybe that's like the renaissance. So obviously this was his way back, and years later he had some very good results in his career. And Shahzam was someone where, funnily enough, another AWPer, he's someone where he's always a good player. Like he had skills, certainly. He's just a very streaky player, and also he's a bit spicy, his personality. If people don't know, like some people are going to like him, some people definitely not going to like him. So what were these two guys like? Seems like this is when this team really got going, right?
Yeah, that's when stuff really started to like click together. I think like a lot more. So we brought over Stanislaw, and we brought over Shaz, and we kind of got lucky because like one of the big reasons that we were able to get him is like the whole like OpTic team at that time like imploded, where it was like the config and like a bunch of other guys. I think they had like a big falling out. So
yes.
We got them for like I think like a really good price because they just everyone wanted like a mutually part, and when we brought them over, like it kind of just started clicking like right away. I want to say, Stanislaw had like a really like kind of like loose calling style where a lot of it was like less structured, a lot more like on the fly, but he also had like really good intuition. And not to mention, even with just Shaz was a lot more consistent and just overall better, like I would say, as like an opt than like PTR was bringing. And he not only did he bring in, I guess, like a lot more like skill, I also felt like him as a player, people give him shit, but he does know what he's doing like most of the time. Like he has like a good sense for the game. I mean, even we'll talk about this later on, but he eventually makes like the transition to IGL and VALORANT. So I mean, he could even in game lead. So he does know what he's talking about for like the most part. So when we were able to add those two players, immediately things started like click a lot more, and we started just beating like a lot more teams even in just practices.
What would you say like the style of Stanislaw? What are his strengths?
His strengths are a lot in his mid-rounding, I'd say, like more than anything. He is very intuitive, I'd say, like more than anything. Like he's someone who he he's barely like emotional. He doesn't really get emotional at all in like any sense. So he's pretty level-headed most of the times, and a lot of it is just really good mid-rounding from him, and just like adapting kind of like what he's doing based off like what he sees like his opponent doing. So if like, for example, they're taking like a certain area of the map, he'll call for adaptations on that utility, or he'll just call for, oh, if they're just hard fighting us, we'll rush like the other side. So he plays like a lot around like what he sees like around the map, or like what's happening, and just mid rounds it. He doesn't do a lot of at least when I played with him, he didn't do like a lot of like very structured set like executes, like a whether that be like a Navi or like a old like existence or something like that, where it was like just hard like executes. But he did like a lot of just very on the fly mid round calling. I'd say was one of his big strengths.
Right. Obviously, one of the interesting things about this story, like people who remember this era will know later, actually, it goes really awesome when you get to the major and you have this run, etc. But before that, no one could have seen this coming, because even though online things were going well, the qualifiers were getting better and better results. Right. Like you're getting closer and closer. The first lands were kind of a bit of a wash, right? They were like kind of whatever. Some of these tournaments didn't go well and the results weren't so good. What would you say what was there, some like teething problems? Was some issues when you got to the lands?
I
mean, you were like at a bunch of Dreamhacks where you were like 8th or fucking 6th or whatever.
Oh yeah, I thought our first line on that team was the minor, but I could be wrong.
I think what you've done is you've just Men in Black deleted the Dreamhacks that didn't go well, and then just gone, yeah, it was awesome.
I think I have it.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Just have some like trauma. Yeah. So, you're right. Actually, you're right. Yeah, some of the initial Dreamhacks, we kind of like bombed out of, and I think like at that time we started like running like to a bit of issues, like at least role wise. Like I felt like at that time we didn't have people like in the correct spots. So I think I remember after that Dreamhack we switched around like the rules quite a bit, and we finally got to like a point in which like I think even for me, like they put me into better spots, because I think at that time I was just like, it was like the equivalent of like a Mirage B like jump spotter, So I had like some really hard like entry roles, which I was never like kind of like a fan of. I've always kind of like hate that like pure like entry role. They switched it around, and I got like a lot better I think spots on like both like CT and T, and that was kind of like, especially going to a minor, if we bombed out of that, I think we would have made like roster changes, I think at that point, or like some people would have been gone, because like I remember like the first few lands, it was not going so hot.
Right. Obviously, another thing that happened was this year was the year when Warden went out as the coach, and then another legendary OpTic player came in because Rambo came in, who's a really old school player. And what's the thing is, I know Rambo quite well. I've even worked with him in the past on like I did a guide with him and stuff. And what's weird about him is he is a real like he approaches Counter-Strike like it was his homework at school. Like he has like a really systematic way to do it and break things down. And then essentially his way of explaining it, as far as I can tell, is he just explains it like how he learned it, if you know what I mean. Like this is how you do this and etc. What do you say it was like to work with him?
Ron, I liked Ron like quite a bit. He's really funny. He's funny in like a different way of like, he shows like almost like no emotions, like almost talking to like a robot, and like sometimes he just doesn't like get like you'll tell him a joke and he'll like it takes him like a few seconds to like process it. It's like you'll tell him something and then he's like he's silent, and he's like yeah he has to like break down a joke, or like Ron, we're just joking with you. But he was he was pretty like helpful for us, especially like in the beginning. I remember he brought over like a lot in terms of like he wanted to bring like a lot more like I guess structure to the team, in a sense. Like he was someone that when he was playing with what was the team called?
Team 3D?
Team 3D, yeah. When he played with Team 3D, he was big on structure. He wanted like, let's have some set pistols, some set strats, some let's add more like depth to our game. Essentially, let's add like a few of these like eco plays that we can do and just toss in and stuff like that. So that way, if it's a high pressure situation or something like that, and people aren't like on the same page with like the mid rounding, or if people start getting like a little bit nervous, we have something we can like basically fall back on. That was something that he wanted to bring over, and we implemented some of it. Eventually, that actually became like a point in which like that's why like kind of the team like broke apart, is because there's like a differences in like how people wanted to call. But when we first initially tried it and stuff like that, I think it added like an extra layer to the game. And just in general, something that was really big for him is he kind of brought like a level of like calmness. He could tell when like tensions were getting like kind of high and stuff like that, and he was really like, whenever he spoke, he was always just very, very calm, and like he tried to like approach everything from like the perspective of, how do I put it? Sorry, give me 1 sec. I'm just thinking how to put this. He essentially he essentially took all the input from like everyone from around the team and tried to find the best way to incorporate what everyone was talking about. Like he tried to always to be fair to like everyone and take everyone's input and always try to work with what's given. He never really like shut anyone out or anything of that nature, and he would always talk to whoever. He wasn't one of those coaches, I guess, where it's just like, it's either you do it my way or get the fuck out. He was always someone that if you told him something, he tried to work with it, essentially.
Right. Obviously, before we get to the part with the minor and the majors, so the other question I had was, it looks like you actually got, like the concept of like the sweet spot where it's like, this is exactly where you want to be. I don't know what the other name would be. I don't know, the sour spot or something. But you guys were stuck in that before these lands, because you were in this nightmare position that a lot of people don't understand exists in pro Counter-Strike, especially if you're an American team, which is you're like good enough where you can hang with the teams who go to the lands, but you're in that thing where you're never getting invited because you haven't been to enough lands and had the places. You don't have enough high HLTV ranking. So what happens is people think because you're not going to lands, you don't do anything. It's the opposite. You play like every day fucking qualifiers and they just never end. It's like match after match after match. And the worst thing is if you come second or third or fourth in these, it's like one team goes. It's like you just feel like, what a waste of time. Like a push the ball, drop the hill again. You must have just had so many maps of online play at this time period.
Oh man. Yeah, that I remember these days. There's actually even like a few funny stories about that. I remember so many days of we weren't. It wasn't even like a system now where there's like closed qualifiers and stuff like that, where like even if you're like I guess like the main pro teams get invited to the actual tournament.
Yes.
But at least like the teams right below that, they get invited to the close fires. No, it was constant open qualifiers. Like we were just playing like 8 or 9 just random like teams, and then the next day you play professional teams. Next day more professional teams. There's just always like a constant grind. And I remember there just being so many days of just like these BO3s and just open qualifiers. So like, no matter, like you said, it was like this really weird spot of like, we just have to keep playing, and there was 0 invites for us like at all. So no matter what, we had to like work our way like through these gauntlets. And I always think it was kind of good for us because it did help build like more confidence and like help build some synergy, because we were kind of like a new team at that well, not a new team, but it helped build like a lot more like chemistry between us, especially for some maps. I remember that because I remember us not being able to play like a lot of like certain maps just because either people like banned them or people some of the maps just never got through. So we were able to get like a lot of extra reps in on some stuff. So some of the BO3s were really good, but yeah, that was a gauntlet.
When you went to this minor, which you obviously won and you got to the major, the interesting thing is, especially if someone's from Valorant, the team that you were mainly contended with was the team Rogue, and it had people like Hiko, Sick, MCE was the coach. Also, if
Yeah.
people know CSGO now, Cadian was actually playing there, was open, etc.
Mhm.
So this was like the main team you played. You lost to them in the group stage, then you lost to them in the upper bracket. These are all close games though, and then you had to do this low bracket run, and then you win. You actually beat them in the final though. Like, was this like? It sounds like a pretty thrilling run to win the minor.
Yeah, that was like my really big first like win as a player. I remember that like really well. Where I actually remember against Rogue, the main reason why they beat us the first time was we got very heavily anti-stratted. Like I remember even it was as crazy as we would throw a single flash over Mirage A, and instantly they just dump mollies like towards Palace entrance. No one's even out. It's just one flash, and instantly there's like 2 mollies on the ground. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. Because the main reason for that was whenever we threw like I think these this one flash is always when we would like rush like Palace. It was just a simple flash like over Mirage A or like a 2 or 3 is like when they do it. So we knew they really did their homework when they played us at one time. So we knew that going in, if we ever to play them again, all we had to do was just show like a little bit of the same thing, but we just give a few different looks and we would beat them again. But the first loss, it wasn't that bad. Like I remember thinking, it sucks, but we'll be fine. We have these like next upcoming matches because I think we played United next. Like after that, I could be wrong, but we played United and we always had like a really good like record against them, even in scrims and even in like match play. We were always very confident against them, so I knew we would still like qualify and do really well.
Was it a big deal to make it to the major? Like, have you actually been a fan of CS in this sense? Did you watch majors?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think at the time that's kind of like the dream for like any player is like to eventually like go to the majors and have a chance to compete there. Because I mean, obviously, like that's the biggest tournament of the year. Well, maybe not the year, but the biggest tournament you can get. Essentially, as a player, you get your name kind of like engraved, whether it be like through stickers. Because I think at that time, whoever qualified like made it, and you would get like stickers. So not only get your own signature in the game now, and you're kind of like moralized in like a sense, but again, you get the chance to really compete at like the highest level and do really well. So I do remember it being like a really big deal. Like me and like I think like Android or something. I think we got off stage and we went to the bathroom like, man, we did it, So it was like it was kind of like a wholesome moment, but it's kind of like that moment I think like as a player when you have that really really big first result, because I think for like a lot of people there's like a lot of self-doubt, and I think even like for me that was something that I struggled with early on like as a player, whereas like I felt like sometimes like I didn't necessarily like deserve to be there, some imposter syndrome kind of thing. So that was like a big step for me for like getting over that hurdle and finally starting, I guess, to really start my career, if you want to say.
Right, when you went to this major, obviously, like there's a part of the storyline I'm going to save here. So I'm just going to ask about the first match, right? And it's going to go like this, right? Yes, people who remember this major will know Inferno was one of the best maps for complexity at this major. But alive, listen, I know Stanislaw, obviously when he was in the old OpTic, had beaten Astralis and stuff. But mate, the balls on this guy, because the idea in a BO1, if you play Astralis, remember this is 2018, guys. They're like the GOAT Astralis. He vetoes to Inferno against the start. People don't know they're probably the best team ever on that map. Like, and they absolutely destroy you on this one. Like, but what was the? Did you actually know? Like, we have to play it. Is it just our best map? We just got to take, even if it's Astralis, we've got to play it.
Well, honestly, the crazy thing is, like, we didn't even know that was like our best map because, like, when we were playing, the funny thing is, like, prior to that, we were getting dumpstered on Inferno. Like, we went to this Germany boot camp, and I mean that was like my first real introduction to like European Counter-Strike and stuff like that. And like, man, I never knew how much of like a difference it was because they have so many different styles, even though they're in the same region. Like some of the Russian or more like Ukrainian kind of style teams are like, some of them are a lot more methodical, but some of them are also like crazy aggressive. I'm sure you remember like some of the teams where they were just running it down.
I mean,
with,
Vegas
like,
Squadron was the most famous one, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was the team we played against, and honestly, we always did really well against those guys because it's kind of like almost it reminded us a little bit how like some of the NA teams play a little bit. Like some of them are very, very wild, so like we knew kind of how to play against that. That was more of our tempo. But that was our first like real introduction. But with the whole veto on Astralis, the thing is we were a really good Mirage team, and obviously that's Astralis's permaban at the time, and I think our options were it was going to be like an overpass nuke or like an inferno or something of those lines, and our overpass was not very good, and even our nuke, I guess like Astralis had like a very, very solid nuke as well that we weren't like super confident going in. So we thought our best map was our second or third best map at the time, at least in terms of like results, like Inferno. And plus it's a very I feel like it was like a safe pick where there's not too much we haven't seen on it. So I think that was our kind of mindset going in. It's like a map that we know how to play really, really well. We've had some decent results on it, even though I guess in scrims we're kind of get dumpstered on it. But we thought it'd be like a good idea, but unfortunately, if I remember correctly, they kind of just dumped us.
Thing is, though, I do get the feeling, though, because of that, and then if you say in the boot camp went badly, I think that's why all the other teams in that first Swiss system were like, yeah, okay, we'll play Inferno, because the joke is then they all gave you it, and then you just got through the next phase.
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is like, the weird thing about our team, I think at the time, if I remember correctly, was we had like 3 really strong maps. Like our Mirage, I think at that time, we only lost it like once out of like the last 18 games or something crazy. And what was the other really, really good map that we had? Was it our nuke was actually pretty good for us. Oh, it was Cash. Yeah, Cash yes. Was all. Yeah, yes, it was Cash. Cash was our other really, really, really strong map. So we had Mirage and Cash, which were we had 80-90% win rates, and so. Because it was this weird system where it was just a BO1 the whole way through, you could ban. We always ban our 2 weakest maps, our 2 weakest maps. So we'd always get it on basically Inferno at that point because no one wanted to play us on Cash or
right. They look up the win rates and shit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because I think at that time even Europe, there wasn't a lot of really strong European Cash teams. At least my I can't.
I think a lot of people even vetoed it at the time.
Yeah, exactly. So we were always able to get it on I guess Inferno in that case because that was one map where I think everyone plays. I don't know of a team there's not really a team that bans it, so it always would coincidentally end up on that map. So.
Thing is, though, in a way, that actually makes the run more legit because when you kept winning this, everyone just went they must just be in League, like a one trick on Inferno. All they do is play Inferno, as you're saying. It wasn't even the go-to map for you guys.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. And we did end up playing even Cash and Nuke at some points, and we ended up winning those as well. So we weren't a one trick map team, but it's just kind of how the vetoes always ended out because no one else wanted to play Cash or Mirage really against us. So it was all right. I mean, Inferno it is.
The thing is, though, obviously that first phase of the major, because this is actually when the major was the major, this is back when the first stage doesn't really have, the joke now is you really do have the first stage of the major sometimes as, fucking phase and vitality. Yeah. But then you look in the other phase, it's into the break, what? Because the qualifiers are so weird now. Back then, the first phase is sort of the lesser teams, and then you go through and you get to that. So most of those teams is whatever. But when you get to the next phase, right, because everyone's seen you've just won on Inferno, you got dumped by Astralis, everyone's right, well, obviously this team team. That's it, isn't it? Like, they're going to get beaten now easily. Like, to beat, like, Fnatic, you beat the G2 with Kenny S and Shocks on it. Like, if you're someone coming from your background, this must be like you're living in a dream or something, right? You're beating out these massive name players from Europe.
Well, yeah, it's just I studied, especially when I first came over from like Call of Duty. Like, my goal was like I want to be, the best I can possibly be, and so I would study like, especially like Shocks, Kenny S. Like, I'd watch like all these guys play and like see how they would play, and what were like the differences, that I could perceivably see between like me and them. So for me, it was like really. It's a weird experience, to go from like, I guess, watching these guys like all the time, and now you're like, facing them now finally, like in the actual servers. So, being able to beat like some of the people that I used to look up to, watch like all their matches, and basically that point, and be able to finally compete, beat them, and stuff like that. It was a really nice feeling, to be honest with you. Yeah, I have so many like fond memories of like that time, just being able to like really, I guess, prove it to myself, and just in general to be able to show that like all the work I guess I put in was for something, I guess.
Right, as you said, this was also before we got like the elimination and the progression best of threes. Everything was a BO1. So when you'd gone 2-0 in the second Swiss, like you are one win away. But this is what I want to ask you, because I always wondered this, which is you ended up getting Big, who'd had like a really like, because they'd beaten FaZe, they sort of all like must have like taken that seed. Then they beat Tyloo, and it's like your options with this. You could either play Big, Team Liquid, or Astralis. Now, if people don't know, Team Liquid and Astralis like number 1 and number 2 team in the world. When you drew Big, you must have just been like, "This is like the fucking we hit the lottery here, boys. Like we actually have a chance."
You would not believe everyone. I remember I think it was my manager and like a few others. Like, we were all at like we were at the little drawing things, because like I think they had it at like some system where they did a live drawing. They did it literally live. So you could watch it like in person, like who you were drawing, and we drew Big, and I remember my manager is just he's just clapping. He's absolutely crazy, and we're just like, oh yeah, thank you, because I think at that time we never really struggled with Big, even though I think they were doing kind of pretty well at this tournament. Like, they were having a good run. Whenever we played them in practice and stuff like that, we always felt like really confident against them. I don't know what it was in particular. Maybe it was just a stylistic thing, but whenever we played them, even like practice and stuff like that, somehow they just felt very readable, or they felt very what's the word? It just felt obvious, like where they were or what they were doing. Yeah, exactly. So we were very happy with that draw.
When you guys got to the playoffs, right? Look, in theory, that is already an insane run for this team. Like, at the time, again, this isn't. People are forgetting it's only later majors. Like, it's the modern majors actually where you get all these really crazy teams make the playoffs and do the runs. Actually, back then, usually top 8 at the major would basically be like 7 of the top 8 teams in the world. Like, these are the killers. And when you got there, in theory, you did get a draw that wasn't impossible. You got MIBR, and this is when MIBR was like, they were all right, but they could also be, a bit in and out. It's better than getting, some of the other monster teams you can get, obviously. But at the same time, I know, because MIBR did this to a couple of teams. I know later, like at the next major, they did this to Renegades, where they had them in the round of 8, and Renegades thought they could beat. The problem, obviously, here is the experience of those players is ridiculous. Like, they're not going to get nervous on stage. I'm assuming they're expecting you to, right?
Yeah. So when we drew MIBR, I honestly thought it was a pretty good draw for us, and that we could easily go like even further than what quarterfinals. But the big thing I think that really kind of hurt us there was like, one, our map pool was kind of like exposed a little bit, because now it went from like a BO1 format to a BO3 format. So now we started playing into the maps that were a little bit more like not our comfort level. So they picked Train, which was like a map that we were kind of like, we weren't bad on, but we also weren't like a good team. Like, it wasn't like it was like no one on the team was like, okay, we're playing Train, boys. Let's go. No one on the team was ever like that. But that was like the first big thing, and then the second thing is as well. This was also a big crowd. You know, we had like some we had some like Dreamhack crowds where it was just like maybe like 100 people, but now you're in a stadium with like 10,000, you know, or something crazy. So,
did you feel the difference?
Yeah, I mean, there was like a big difference. At least for me personally, did it change how I played? I don't think it changed how I personally played, but I do think it added like some pressure on, you know, maybe some other people. I think Def felt maybe like a little bit more pressured at that time because like
it's a home crowd as well, I mean, right?
Well, yeah, he's from the UK, and like the whole crowd is like, you know, kind of like cheering him on, you know, essentially. Yeah, exactly. So it was just like I think he felt like maybe a little bit more pressure, but for the most part, yeah, I think the experience difference was like really shown there. Despite like even how do I put this? Like I remember even like winning like a few clutches, and you know they were just never faced. You know, the whole time it just felt like they were confident. They would ego fight and stuff like that. They were not afraid to take like any duels or anything like that. And I think as the pressure kind of like mounted on like a little bit more, we got more and more kind of like reserved and maybe like scared as a team. So yeah, there was like a big difference in terms of like just how like willing we were. We're willing to take risks. Essentially, they were willing to take risks, and I felt like at that time for us, like especially if you start getting down, we just started playing more and more and more back on site and just more scared in general. So that, like you said, it was a big experience difference and just more pressure on us.
Right. Obviously, the problem is because of like a mixture of like they played Inferno in the first Swiss, and then in the second one, it's like big in the 2-0 game, like because everyone was a hater of big back then as well. Everyone obviously then just was like, well, even though they did win all these games, just a fluke in it. They're not actually good. How do you handle that if people just dismiss it? Like you just had a top 8 in like the World Championship, and people are sort of like, it doesn't count.
I mean, it just kind of. I hate when people like I guess like dismiss that kind of stuff, but I mean, I think that just comes with the territory of just like anything. At least from what I've learned is like, it doesn't matter like what you do. Like you can even be like Michael Jordan and people will still be trying to find, you know, ways how like Wilt Chamberlain is still the GOAT. Yes. So, you know, it really doesn't matter like what you do. Like there's just going to be people that, you know, try and dismiss you. But I know for me, like especially like when I was like a lot younger, some of that stuff like really kind of like bothered me because like I always had it in this like way, like I wanted to like prove myself, you know, like the people and stuff like that. So, you know, the next LAN tournaments, you know, I tried like, I'm going to try like even harder and like stuff like that. But at least from like what I've learned now is like, you know, we did really well, at least in my opinion. And I don't think it was just a fluke, but what ended up happening is like kind of like after that tournament, the team kind of started to like not fall off, but I think there started to be some real big tensions kind of like between players, and there was like some serious like kind of like internal issues like behind the scenes where like just the relationships with players was kind of like deteriorating, where like people were like, kind of like losing like respect for each other. So it was like I said, I know our results like after that weren't like that great in terms of, you know, placing well and doing well, but at the same time it was just, I don't know if that was like an in-game issue. It's just more of like how we were just talking to each other essentially, because it kind of just got to a point in which the environment turned really, really toxic. So it kind of became pretty big mess, to be honest with you.
I do have a couple of lands I want to ask about. Like there's the one where it was the CS Summit one, where it was like NRG and then a bunch of like the lower top 10/10 to 20 teams. And this one, you came fourth at. Mate, just looking at the scores feels exhausting because every fucking match you played at this was like 3 maps, like 16-14, 1917 overtime. Like the minimum anyone could win a map was like 16-12 or something meant. Like this looks ridiculous. Like you played like a billion fucking rounds of CS, it looks like.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much to go into. I remember, you know, something that you may not know is even after the major, for example, I think everyone was exhausted, and we all wanted to kind of like take like a break because like we just spent like 3 months in like Germany, you know, like
Right.
prepping and like playing this major. And I remember like everyone thought they're gonna get break, and all of a sudden like we got a call from like management. It's like guys, you're not getting a break. We just got a new tournament that we're gonna invite to. You know, send it out. And like everyone was like, what? We don't no break or anything like that. So we had no break after the major, and then we went to this. I think it was like this New York LAN. It was like
an MSI one, I think. It was the one you played
it was
Vanguard,
like it was like some it was like one was like we're all BO1s, and ever since that point we had zero break. Like as like a team.
You just kept
so
going.
like that, we just kept going, you know. And it's just like I understand like the whole like mentality of like, you know, keep it going, keep doing well, but at the same time, you know, give the guys a few days off. But yeah, so anyways, we did all that. We did all the tournaments, and then we come into Summit. Still not. I don't think we had any player break of a sort, and we came into Summit, and then yeah, it was just like grueling. Like all the maps are just super close and just competitive. It was such a that LAN was, man. I have so many like I had some bad memories of that, especially after that OpTic game. But yeah, that was always just it was just a really tough. That was a really tough LAN, I think, for the team, and that's I think really where things started to go downhill because prior to that even event, we always lost to that OpTic team.
Right.
I don't know why. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was like something maybe between like Stanislaw or like some past history or something like that. But somehow whenever we played like the OpTic team, we just lost. There's I don't know why we couldn't beat those guys at that time. I think a lot of it was probably just mental, like more than anything, because I don't think it was like anything particular in game. Because when I watched those guys play, like you could tell based off like their utility what they were gonna do, and like in whenever you would like anti-strat them or do things of that nature, I mean, the tells were obvious. I just don't know why like we couldn't shoot back sometimes. So, but yeah, the team after that point, the team really started like kind of like fracture apart, and it got into some like weird territory where how do I explain it even? It was kind of like I'm not sure if you ever heard this described, but it's kind of like the team almost like came like dead inside, where it's just like people know there's like changes are going to be happening, so people start caring like a lot less,
just
or like
right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it was just like kind of like a dead team atmosphere.
If people don't know, if you're a casual fan, the weird thing about being a pro Counter-Strike player, because we don't have like a traditional off-season, it's not like everyone's waiting for. What happens is, even if they don't actually tell you, even if you're the one getting replaced, you always hear the rumor. You hear the rumor from someone else or your friend, or even worse, you hear the rumor of like, this person's going to the team, and you're thinking, that's weird. They haven't mentioned that to me in the team. And everyone knows like a couple of months out, and usually what they do is they sort of have it in the background set up. Remember, there's no poaching rules in CSGO. And then what they really do is they're just waiting for you to have a bad LAN. And when you have the bad LAN, it's like, right, bring you in the room. It's just because of that LAN. But really, it was like prepped, or they were thinking about it for a month before,
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, at that point, it was just kind of obvious that like people weren't like happy with each other, and we were just kind of like coasting. I think.
I do have another LAN I want to ask you about though, which is, I actually think this one you got mad unlucky at, dude, which is when you went to that Dreamhack at the end of the year, right? You win your group. Remember, if you win your group, you should get the easier team. Yeah. And what happened was, because Steele's Ghost Gaming, which used to be amazing at BO1 upsets, had beaten Vitality. This was the Vitality before they had Alex, but people forget this. Everyone thinks ZywOo only started playing like 2019. No, after the major, they made the Vitality team with Happy initially, but it was still like RPK, NBK, all those guys in Apex, and they had ZywOo. You had to play them in the semis, and you even win a map. Like, this is like an interesting series, but everyone obviously knows now, well, they're fucking cracked out, aren't they? Like, now it's kind of bullshit. Like, they obviously won the tournament, didn't they? Like, if you play them in the final, at least you just get to come second.
Yeah, no, we got the unlucky draw against Vitality, and it was just like, man, because I think we felt like pretty confident going up against Ghost. I mean, it was, I don't know our record against them, but I felt like it was pretty. It was kind of like back and forth, but I could be remembering it wrong. But against Vitality was a team that we really didn't have like a lot of experience playing, and obviously that was like, you know, ZywOo's like DPU team, and you know, you come to find out like later on they were actually, as you said, like pretty insane like down the line. So we ended up playing those guys, and yeah, it was a very close like 3-map series that I think we eventually lost on you, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Was ZywOo actually good?
Yeah, you could tell he was like really good in terms of he has this thing where he always feels like he's in the right position at the right time, you know, and it's like it's not like, so it's where I played against like oppressive players where they feel very like they're very aggressive, you know, they're forcing you to like use all this utility to like clear out like everything, you know. It's like players that like they restrict the space that you're giving. But ZywOo is more of a, to me, he played a lot more like, if you came to his spot, he's at least getting one, or but he's never dying, essentially. Like he always positioned himself in a way to like at least get like, you know, 2-3 kills like minimum with very little risk. So you can never really punish him, and you had to make sure like your utility was always like on point, like whenever you went to the site. It was like, he was a player in which it was just you just couldn't punish him, it felt like. At least how it seemed from like my perspective at the time.
Right. Obviously, after this, as we've alluded to already, you got benched from the team, and that was just it for complexity. I did have a random detail when I was looking through the old wikis to just see some little things, which is, why did you play some qualifiers for the fucking Brazilian, like, INTZ team, which was you and a bunch of Brazilians? Like, you don't speak Portuguese, right? Why are you playing with these guys?
So the weird thing, so I was, they actually approached me at some point. I was actually getting back into the scene because I think after the whole like complexity thing, that was like a very rough period, because kind of like behind the scenes is like, you know, I think I was like, you know, 18 or something like at the time, 19 at the time, and you know, after, you know, I played with the whole complexity squad for like a hot second. And, you know, that was my first pro team. And then slowly over time, like, you know, there's always that fear, like being like cut and stuff like that. So I had so much like built up like anxiety and like just depression, like after the whole like complexity thing. I remember like for like 2 weeks, I could not get out of bed after the whole like complexity cut. Like it was a really rough period for me, because like it was like, to me, I've never been really good with like losing or like failure or stuff like that. Like it always feels like the world's ending. So like for the longest time, I just took like a very like kind of like long break. That was like my first real, you know, I guess battle, if you want to say, with like, you know, any form of like depression. But I eventually got out of it, and part of like coming back was like I started grinding and playing like a whole bunch, and all of a sudden I got like an opportunity with the Brazilian guys. They just hit me up kind of out of the blue. It's like, hey, one of our guys can't play. We kind of need like an emergency sub. Would you be able to help us out? And honestly, I was like, yeah, sure. Yeah, why not? Because at that time, I really wasn't really doing anything else. I think there was like one team that I was hoping maybe to play for, but, you know, in all honesty, I just told them, hey, these guys need me like for a few days, but, you know, afterwards I'd be happy to play. But yeah, so I hopped over to that team, and it's a pretty interesting experience because, as you said, I don't speak Portuguese at all, and so what I kind of had to do was I downloaded like some Duolingo, you know, I got the app and like everything, and I asked him to go through the map with me and just describe all the Portuguese callouts, and I started like just memorize it all. So what ended up happening is, I think it was Yell at the time that was a caller. He him and Zan would sometimes, if they needed me to do something, they would just translate it for me, like kind of like mid game, which is kind of like a weird system because like obviously if you need callouts to be like really really quick, yeah, it's kind of hard. But for the most part, I was just put into the kind of like lurking positions, and I just watched what they were kind of like doing like on the map. Essentially, I would just watch and do my best Portuguese if I could, and just try my best in that some sense. So it actually ended up working really pretty well. I felt like we gelled like really really well, and might have been like an opportunity to even bring me on at some point like full time, but obviously my Portuguese needed a lot of work. So yeah.
Right. Obviously, I'm more interested in talking about like the latter end of the CSGO career and doing like Flashpoint in the last run, etc. But the rest of this year, sort of just like a wash, isn't it? Because you were just stuck around like the lower end of the NA scene. Like, as you were saying earlier, if you were bombed out by the complexity thing, it's got to be hard mentally to go way back down again and also think there's no path back. Like, no one's trying to pick you up, and there's not many chances to prove yourself, right?
Well, yeah, that's the like big issue. I think is there's so many times I feel like I've seen it happen, like maybe in the NA scene where a player doesn't succeed in like maybe like a system or something of that nature, and what ends up happening is it's just like no team will touch you like from that point forward. Like it's very hard to actually, or it's very rare to actually see a player like go to like a kind of like a high level team, they get dropped, and for them to actually like work their way back up. It's like usually it's like you have your like one, maybe like one chance, one opportunity, and then it's just like, yeah, you're just gone, from the scene like permanently. Like, people just, they have like this maybe like preconceived notion of you, and it's just like, yeah, why take a chance on this guy? He didn't do very well like at the high level when we could just get a European player, or we could just get, there's a new up and coming, that could be pretty good. So I think that happens like a lot in kind of like the North American scene. I think that's maybe also one of the reasons that kind of like eventually start to fall apart like a little bit. But yeah, as you said, it was a real mental challenge for me to kind of like it's like, because I didn't see any way to really like get back, because at this time as well, like I think every team was just importing other players. Almost every team was like a mixed team, like at some point where I think, if I remember correctly, like I think like half the players in like the North America scene were like not even like from North America. So it was like, so for me there was like, I didn't really see like a way back. But I mean, what else are you supposed to do, I guess, like at that point, other than try. So I ended up joining a few different teams, like even like I think one of them was like Lazarus, which, I mean, we had very few like good we didn't have like crazy results. I mean, we had like some decent ones, but that was actually a big transition point for me, because I actually went back to like full-time OpTic, and I had also Fraud as a coach, which
Okay.
he actually helped me out like quite a bit. And for those who don't know, Fraud, probably the best North American operator of all time, I want to say, in like 1.6.
Yeah, easy.
And like, yeah, and also just a top operator in general, even in the world. So he was someone that like really helped me, even as a player.
Because of his role, has a really like, his mindset's all about like how the star players and how you like get the most out of your game and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for me, he really helped me out in like a lot of different ways, like especially in like pacing, in terms of like, being very aggressive sometimes, then backing it down, being like very passive, and just always trying to like switch up your game and just give different looks. That was something he really helped me out a little bit, even just like the mentality going in. So that was something that really helped me forward. And then eventually we got to a point where I joined with this Flashpoint team, and I kind of like reunited with FNS like once again. And yeah, we went to this. We started that whole team, which it was kind of like how to put it? It was kind of like a team of like, I don't want to say like rejects, but it was just like, no one I
just
think
the best
FNS
players not on a team, basically. Like, if people don't know,
exactly.
FNS obviously is a tenured player. Wardell was always like a rising talent. When he was on Ghost, he was pretty good. Like, everyone knows that he was actually like one of the better players. Spoiler, it's no surprise he briefly was good in Valorant. Obviously, I mean, even the people might not know as well, like Sub Rosa played Valorant. If people don't know, for TSM, he was a half-decent player. Just people used to think he cheated. And then actually the last player is an underrated player, the guy Infinite. His problem, we won't go into it, he just did some spicy stuff that meant he couldn't be touched. Like, he was actually a good player, mate. I remember watching him play. He has some skills. Like, this lineup wasn't bad. And at this tournament, actually, look, you guys came like 5th to 6th, but that wasn't a meme. Like, the team had no org. You're just playing. Like, and some of these games, like, you're in all these matches. They're all competitive games. Like, you could have gone further, I think.
Yeah, no. So it was actually pretty interesting. So, like, yeah, obviously Wardell after his time, I think he was on a contract with Ghost for like the longest point, in which like he somehow the whole org disappeared, but they tried to keep Wardell on, just because like they were hoping to get like a buyout from him, like from some team, but he stayed on for like a year or a year and a half with and eventually they're just like, all right, enough is enough, just drop him. So we got him, and obviously, like you said, with Sabrosa, ex cheater, and then we had like even Gage or Infinite. That was one thing. Infinite was a really, really good player. The only thing I feel like that holds him back from like taking like the next level has always been like kind of like his mental, like more than anything, because like he has a really good like skill set. He really does. Like he's very smart in game, and he also has like really good mechanics to back it up. But we threw together that team, and we all felt like really confident about it because like I think everyone in their respective role was kind of like the best free agent like possible. It was like a combination of like we have a really good opper, we have really good like players in the sense of like myself like as like a hybrid, and we have like Infinite as like a really top tier rifle. Sabrosa, he has a ton of experience, also has played really well, and we have like really good IGL. So we thought, it'd go really, really well for us. And it ended up actually going pretty well. Like we had some really, really good results, and we ended up even like qualifying and beating out like a whole bunch of other like professional teams. One of them being like, I think one of them was like Chaos at some point. Whenever I think we played NB a few different times, we also would beat them like consistently, and just even like other few professional teams. So we had some decent results. I'm trying to think. FLASHPOINT had a qualifier, if I remember. Yeah. So one of our big first, like I guess maybe it was our only like big result was the team wasn't around for very long, so we went to the FLASHPOINT qualifier, and I think that was our only tournament. But we went to this FLASHPOINT qualifier with a bunch of other like teams, because for people who don't know, FLASHPOINT was like it was like a response to I think it was ESL's like the franchise system. It was supposed to be like a direct competitor to that whole system. So. And one of the big benefits of that is like if you make it into the system, even if you're unsalaried, we'll give you like I think it was like $5,000 a month.
Yes.
For
and the prize money was monster. Like first place was like $500K. Yeah. It was like it's like a major basically.
It really was, and because I think at that time as well, what ended up happening was like ESL kind of just killed like the NA scene like a little bit, in the sense of like they just removed like the whole like
well, they used to be like a sort of totally separate thing, whereas now it was just like basically just like Team Liquid just comes to Pro League, that's it. It's like say fuck NA sort of.
No, I remember they killed off the whole like North American scene, where it's just like it's basically these orgs are invited in, and for the rest of you, well, if you want any chance of competing, well, you have to go through like this Mountain Dew like league division, and not to mention you have to place really well in that one, and then you have to go and battle the European tier 2, which at the time is like full salaried like pro teams. Some I think even Vitality or something maybe it was in that at some point, like some really big like important teams. And the Brazilian scene as well. So it's basically all the top teams for that each region all battle out, and then one person gets the spot, and it's just like, well, it's either that's your only chance in the ESL Pro League, or you have Flashpoint, which obviously everyone chose to do the whole Flashpoint season. So we ended up doing that, and we qualified. I don't remember the matches leading up to the qualification. I remember, or at least the online portion. I think we didn't really struggle that much. We qualified, and then when we got to the actual LAN, there was like some spicy matches, I'd say, there that we played. I think we played some Polish team. I don't remember their exact name, but we beat them. We beat Chaos and a few other salary teams to eventually make it in barely. I remember it being a very, very close series, but we were all very, very happy when we made it.
Right. After this, obviously, if people don't know, during Flashpoint 1 is when the beta for Valorant came out, and everyone was already playing. The joke, especially because Flashpoint went online, and it was everyone was just stuck. It's I even heard loads of the teams at Flashpoint, on the side, were just fucking playing Valorant and checking it out and trying to. Were you already somebody who was an early adopter? Did you already start to scout out, and maybe this is the next game for me?
Actually, no. I kind of continue to just play Counter-Strike because when you're in $1 million tournament, at that point, it's might as well just try as best you can, see how far you can go in the whole thing. But I remember, I think a few people on my team got early Valorant and were checking it out because.
Put it this way, I think Wardell might have even admitted publicly that he was just playing Valorant during this fucking tournament. So I think I flamed him what the fuck are you doing?
I know a few people are, but it was just I'm usually one. It's everyone has their own different ways of just doing whether I've seen people just not play Valorant or play CSGO at all, and then they just show up the matches and try. So
some people can do it.
There's some people that it's better for them sometimes not to play. I would say for the vast majority of people that's not true, but there are some there are a few players that I can name that they do better when they have something to de-stress, or they just do other stuff just grinding every day. Sometimes they perform worse, but so. Yeah, then I remember a few people were checking it out and stuff like that. I didn't really latch on really that much because I was still competing at the time, and I also that tournament was something else because it was really funny during this Flashpoint tournament. This multi-million-dollar tournament. Some crazy stuff happened. COVID started, and then all of a sudden we went from playing in the arena, and then everyone was tossed into a Airbnb, and
for a fucking month or something as well. It was a long time.
Within a month, everyone just thrown into this, these random Airbnbs, and they started giving you all this different they figured out this whole system for food and everything. So we got tossed into this Airbnb during COVID when it was first starting out. All the different guys, I think it was a 3-2, where it was three of my members, where I think it was FNS, Sabrosa, Wardell were in one Airbnb, and it was myself and then Infinite in the other. And it was crazy because I think Infinite eventually just left the Airbnb, because he was they were starting to get really worried about COVID, because it's starting to spread a whole bunch, and everyone's kind of starting to panic. So I think his mom drove down or something like that, picked him up, and packed up and left. So I was just stuck in this Airbnb alone with no human contact for a month, which was dude. So I think for me, after the whole Flashpoint tournament, I think we made it to the quarterfinals. Eventually lost out to, I think it was Cloud9 at the time, with Floppy and a few others. We eventually lost out, but afterwards, I didn't really want to touch Valorant at that time. It was kind of another period in which I kind of wanted to take a break, because also during that mid-tournament kind of thing, my girlfriend broke up with me, and there was some things, I think she cheated or something. So it was just I was just man, No, it was like a combination of like I hadn't seen like another person in like a month, like just face to face, and yeah, it's just like we had like kind of like a rough result. So for me, I wanted to kind of like sit back, take a break, and just see like if there's any Valorant opportunities or if there's any like further CSGO opportunities, because I wasn't really decided whether or not I wanted to pursue Valorant just yet. Like I kind of wanted to see like what it looked like, you know, just take like a little bit step back. So that was kind of like my plan for that period.
Right, one of my last questions about CSGO is an obvious one, which is knowing what we now know about Valorant, and if anyone's ever seen Ye play in Valorant, obviously the fucking AWP is his best gun. Like, that was like the gun in the dominant alter. If we look back now, and we look at all these teams, like, look, I'll give you the Wardell one. I actually do think Wardell's pretty skilled. In fact, quite frankly, from the little I know about Valorant, I think the guy just... He's not all there in the fucking head, mate. He could have been a much better player. He's done some weird decisions in his career, whatever. He's just talented. Some of the other players, though, when I look back now, it's like if we go back in time, surely you just do your CSGO career as a pure AWPer and you just stick like that and you try and make it, right? Wouldn't you have been a much better player?
Yeah, if I could redo everything, I think the first thing would be like I wouldn't forfeit like my roles, because I think one of the biggest problems was like I was fine with like, you know, kind of like doing whatever for the team in the sense of like it's like, oh, you want the op and stuff like that. No, that's fine. I'll just, you know, the rifle. Like I think what I've learned, at least like about myself, is like I find the most enjoyment kind of being like almost like a star player in a sense. I feel like I can't get engaged into the game like supporting, like almost it's like weird. Not to say I can't like support, but like if my primary role is just like the only like run in and die or like something like that or create space and stuff like that, like I don't know what it is. I just I don't play as well. Like it's almost like it's hard for me to get like invested and like really like, you know, try like every single day. Like it was super weird. So that was something I like learned about myself, and so going forward, especially even like going into like Valorant and like all my future thing, it's like I'm gonna stick to the roles that I want, and I'm gonna be the player that like I envision myself to be. You know, no more, you know, just kind of like bending over and stuff like that. Like this is me, and I'm doing this from this forward. So that was like a big change, like even going into Valorant. And as you said, like if I could redo CSGO, I would have stuck to being a primary opper, because, you know, there was actually a funny period in which I actually think even like Liquid at some point was considering me before I was picked up by Complexity as like an opper. So that was something that I'm like, I look back and it's like, oh, what if I like, you know, held off on like, you know, the Complexity offer like a little bit longer, you know, but like, you can't really look back at that stuff, I feel, and like regret your choices, because like, you know, you don't have the information at that point. Like you said, it's kind of like hindsight in some sense.
I've been pleasantly surprised during the time I've had my Patreon and my Patreon community, the Skrilluminati, by both the financial support they've provided and the moral support. And so this video was kindly supported and made possible by Starlust, Theo Buenzelli, Ahmed Haju, Matt Pugnaccio Racula, Toucan, Jensen Go, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Bot Pounder 420, Yerka 86, Tosh, and as always, you know it, a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to ask a question in one of those AMAs where I tend to go pretty in depth? Sometimes they even spin out into their own videos. Do you want teasers to find out who the upcoming guests are for the myriad of interviews that I do across esports? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest? We have a channel on my Discord where you can do that if you're at the right tier. And of course, you could potentially take part in one of those lengthy esports discussions with me about whatever is on your mind in the scene. Well, if any of those perks sound tantalizing, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.